Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host, and this week in Reykjavik, I was wondering what I was going to talk about on this week's episode, because I've already done an Elden Ring episode, and it's kind of been dominating my gaming life to a really large degree. But there have been a couple of other things that were hanging around the edges, things that I was playing on, just little moments here and there. And it turned out that I did actually get through an entire game without really meaning to. It's quite short, but it's a really interesting one. It's a game that I had on my wishlist for a really long time. Very well regarded game. It's a version of a classic, and it's a really interesting version, and it is Tetris Effect Connected. I played through the journey mode and had a really good time with it, and then all of a sudden realised, hey, I finished the game, I can talk about that. It's actually got a really interesting history, and I'm going to dig into a little bit of that. And whilst reading around Tetris, it has such a long, storied history. There were some interesting things that just fell out of the woodwork. Whilst reading around the game, it's had such an interesting trajectory. So there's plenty to talk about there. And that will be the featured game of this week's episode. But I will talk about a little bit of Elden Ring before I get into Tetris. Last time I talked about it, it was about 20 hours in, and I'd been having a good time with it, but also been having a lot of trouble with it. Obviously it's a difficult game, obviously it's a complicated game. But I've really come along quite a long way, I think, since last time that I talked about it. And I've got a feeling that Elden Ring, being the game that it is, this vast, fascinating, quite deep, varied, just wonderful game, and quite brutal. And it's just such a strange, unusual construction of a game. And I have had some real good progress with it, and my understanding of it and my feelings about it have definitely evolved already over time, and I think will continue to do so. I've got a feeling it's a game that a lot of people are going to be talking about all year, pretty much. So last time I talked about this game, I had beaten Margit and Godric, the first couple of bosses. Margit was a real pitched battle, it was like 30 tries or more, and finally managed to scrape through it and learn Margit's patterns, and come out the other end of it feeling like you'd broken down the first of many walls that this game is going to present to the player. Godric I got past with the help of the, I guess, slightly famous cheese mode of using the rotten stray, which is one of the spirits that you can summon in the game that will poison your opponent, and if you can keep the stray alive long enough, it will poison the opponent for the duration of the fight, so their health is just ticking down, and you can just avoid them from that point on, try not to die, and wait to win the fight. And that's what I did with Godric. And since then, I stopped playing. I had hit a wall after Godric where everywhere that I went seemed very, very hostile and a little too hard. It was just like everywhere you go, you feel like you've made all this progress, but you're running into walls in every direction. And so I stopped playing for a while. I think it was partially because I still had Horizon Forbidden West to finish. So I went back to Horizon, which really felt like such a warm bath of a game after the difficult, hostile, brutal, bleak world of the lands between. And so it isn't an easy game to fall off. I think something that I learned is that if you're not in the mind space, in the head space of Elden Ring, coming back to it after playing other things is really difficult. You maybe have forgotten how careful you have to be, how much it's focused on blocking, how much it's focused on strategy and staying alive. And so I had a bit of a rough re-entry into Elden Ring. I decided to switch it back on after there's so much debate on the show's Discord about the game, and out on the gaming social media, gamer Twitter, the gaming conversation is still somewhat dominated by Elden Ring, and it was enough to hook me back in and think maybe I should try this again. So I came back into Elden Ring and started focusing a little bit more on going back to Limgrave, that first opening area. It's like a high plateau with cliffs on all sides. And there's an awful lot there. There is much more than I initially realized. I kind of felt like I'd finished with Limgrave. I'd been down to the Weeping Peninsula, this southern promontory with a castle and a boss and some other things that you can do, and cleaned that out. And started to move into Liurna, the lake area to the northwest, and to Caelid, this hellish, poisoned, blighted area to the east, which is still kind of difficult now. But going back to Limgrave meant that I found bosses that I hadn't done before. I found hidden caves, and I started leveling up pretty quickly. And that was enough to tilt the scales a little bit. And I think that there is a long trajectory that you take with Elden Ring that is about leveling and about learning the rhythm of the game, learning how to power up your weapons, to improve your armaments, to potentially use magic to find armor that suits you, to find talismans that suit you, to get your head around the crafting system, which is quite vast in its own right. And there are so many different strategies and ways to play that it's just a big accumulation of time and leveling up and learning of systems that will get you to a place where you start to feel like you can take this game on. And it just takes a very long time to get there. I think especially for me as a first-time Soulsborne player, the grind and the slow like scramble that you have to do to get your shit together takes a really long time. And so the game can seem punishing for the longest time. But in the last few play sessions that I've had, I've actually started to feel like I'm achieving some small level of mastery over the game. I've started to take down bosses often on the first try, to see their patterns coming, to know what they might throw at you, to be ready for different phases, to use the magic system wisely, to use the spirit summons wisely. I've learned that you have to keep your spirit summons alive. Don't just let them soak up all of the hits and then die, because if they do, then a boss's attention is going to focus solely on you, and that's when you are in trouble, or at least you're in a tight duel at that point where all of the enemy's attacks are coming your way, and you have to be very focused on blocking, evasion, and hitting when the time is right. So keeping your spirit summons alive and leveling them up so they can stay alive for longer has played a big part in it. But also, I think as the stats increase, there is so much happening behind the scenes in the spreadsheet of numbers that Elden Ring is always running in the background. So it's a really big accumulation of different things that start to make the game feel manageable. And as I was leveling up, I was getting better at playing, getting more strategic in combat, getting more conservative in attacking, and more focused on defense and variation in the types of attacks that I was using. I started to stop just leveling up my health all of the time. Having a large health bar is always going to help you, but it's not the only thing that is going to help you. There's a lot more to it than that. And I realized that if I put more energy in and more of my levels into intelligence and mind, then I was really going to have a much easier time with the game. And so my current setup is using the Meteorite Staff, which uses glintstone spells and amazing gravity spells where you tear up rocks from the earth and throw them at enemies. And so ranged combat has now become a possibility. For the first 25 hours of this game, I was not using ranged attacks whatsoever. And it's only really in the last 10 hours that I've been leveled up enough to start using magic. And it's completely changed the game. If you have a spirit summon and a few flasks to replenish your magic and a decent magic meter so you can cast more magic, you can split an enemy's attention between the spirit summon whilst picking them off from afar, dodging them when they come after you. Their attention will then turn away from you again, and you can blast them with more magic. And you can get their health down by half, and the battle is half won. And then you really only have to duel in the final phase of the boss when that spirit summon finally dies. And in my case, when you run out of magic flasks, And then it's just a matter of blocking wisely and attacking at the right time and having a properly leveled up weapon. And you can take down almost anything, it turns out. So I won't give spoilers, obviously. I mean, it's hard to spoil Elden Ring, honestly. The story isn't really spoilable, in my opinion. It's vague, and it's in that Souls-like way, based on crumbs of context and little bits of dialogue that slowly start to fill in the world around you. And bosses, you always know there's going to be huge fiery bosses and dragon bosses and undead bosses and groups of enemies that act as bosses. So it's hard to spoil, but I will give you a little rundown of the enemies that I've managed to take down after those two first climactic boss fights. I managed to go back to some places that I'd been early in the game, like the Siofra River Well. This is an underground area that's quite beautiful. There is a starry sky down there. There are these enemies called the ancestral spirits, these horned beings that you find picking herbs in the moonlight. And they're pretty difficult. They're pretty hard to deal with at first. But with all of the levels and the new experience that I'd gotten, I managed to get through Siofra River in a more coherent way than that first time that I galloped through just trying to avoid everything. And it's a whole self-contained level that I really enjoyed. Because although Elden Ring is an open world game, it has legacy dungeons, which are where story bosses hide, and it's like an assault course of difficult combinations of enemies that you have to get through with a big boss at the end. And there are other contained areas too, and the Siofra River Well is one of those, the underground area with this beautiful mood to the whole thing. And I was able to get through it. It took a while, but with a powerful crystal sword, with magic, and with a much higher health bar and a better awareness of how the game functions, I was able to clear that area, to find a hidden boss down there, to finish a big puzzle that opens up the main boss of the area, the ancestral spirit. That was a really wonderful boss fight with a giant, decrepit old stag spirit that's been reminiscent of Princess Mononoke. It's mournful and actually kind of beautiful, so that was a real pleasure. There is also the Ainsel River Well, the second underground area that I found. And this is a giant ant hive, and at first it was just absolutely brutal trying to get through there. I was creeping through there and incrementally going forward just by learning where the enemies were going to be. But I hit my stride and suddenly was able to just blast through it. There's been like a tipping point in my experience of this game where I now feel equipped. I now feel that I have a chance against pretty much any boss. And I've started to take them down one by one. And the Ainsel River Well features a brutal, giant, dramatic boss called the Dragonkin Soldier of Nokrana? I can't quite remember. These names are quite arcane. And this was a fight that took me a long time. It has a brutal final phase with lightning and electricity attacks. But I was finally able to, with a couple of tips from people, shout out to Grabloid, one of the patrons of the show, who told me don't stand in the water when it's electrical because you'll die. So I realized that you have to use environmental features. And I took down the Dragonkin, and that was the real moment. That was the real moment where I felt like I'm no longer tiptoeing around the edges of Elden Ring, but I'm actually in the game. I've stepped through the door. I'm in the midst of this game now, rather than picking away at the edges, just trying to find my rhythm, trying to find my loadout, how I like to play it. I was like, I think I can play this game now. And since then, it's been really fun, actually. I managed to take down a big roadblock boss for many people called the Magma Worm, which is like a giant lizard with a flame sword. It reminds me a little bit of the Balrog from Lord of the Rings, and was able to take that down on the second try, which I found kind of amazing because I know some people have been struggling with it, and started to feel it a little bit. I was like, I think I can feel this this get good power flowing through my veins, as my friend Kieran would say. So I managed to get up to the next big area of the game, the Altus Plateau, and being there, nothing has really stood in my way, and that feels really empowering, and it feels really good. So I would say that I've finally managed to understand Elden Ring a little bit more. I think focusing on leveling was really good. I found a place where I could get a level in about 8 minutes of play and just went up by about 10 levels in one play session. Took an hour and a half and, got an extra 20 levels on my character. And that really helped. I think finding new weapons also really helped. Learning how to use bloody slash attacks, which really, really take down the enemy's health quickly. Powering up my summons so my spirits last longer. It's been really good. I've really turned a corner with Elden Ring. And I've started to feel like I can do this. That said, there are a couple of infamous bosses that have now appeared on my radar. I've opened up the second Legacy dungeon, and I'm just waiting for the right feeling of concentration and readiness to go and take that on. There is also an infamous boss called Radahn, the Star Scourge, and I now know where Radahn is, and that story has been opened to me through some quest play. So I'm feeling good about it. I'm enjoying Elden Ring. That's my little update. I think I will have guests on who have gotten further in the game than me, and as I progress through it, I feel sure that I will do another dedicated Elden Ring catch-up at some point. But I'm loving it right now. I also picked up a bunch of other games, actually. I picked up Tempest 4000 on the Switch. I'm a big Tempest fan. I used to play it, I think, when it was Tempest 2000. So Tempest 4000 is another version of that game. It's a classic wireframe 3D shooter where you play as a very simple-looking claw that is going on rails into the screen. And you can move around these rails. They present in different shapes, like maybe it's a circle. And you can go all the way around the circle as you fly into the screen, and you have to take out the Space Invaders style enemies that are coming towards you. So I was very excited to play Tempest. I was a big fan of Tempest 2000. This game popped up on Switch out of nowhere, so I bought it straight away, played a few levels of it. It hasn't quite grabbed me in the way that I hoped. It hasn't quite gripped me in that precise pin drop perfection way that the original Tempest 2000 game did. It feels a little loose to control somehow, in a way that I find a little hard to articulate because it's been so long since I played Tempest 2000 that I'm not, it's been 20 years or something, so I'm not sure if my memory of it is entirely accurate at this point, but I remember feeling very in control in Tempest 2000, and as I'm moving around between the different rails in Tempest 4000, I feel less in control. It feels like the claw moves around faster, and it has a little more momentum perhaps, so it's a little harder to judge where it's going to land in the play area as you move left and right. But I am going to persist with it. I am going to keep picking at it. Tempest is a classic, low commitment arcade game, and it's nice to have something like that in your life, I think. If you're playing a big game like Elden Ring, but you don't feel like settling down and getting that concentration going and that full focus going, it's nice to have a few games that you can just chill with. I also played a little bit of Welcome to Elk, which was a recommendation in the Discord. This is a simple line-drawn, top-down narrative game, I would say, in which you play as a young woman who has arrived in a harsh, small Nordic village where life is very hard, where people drink a lot, where there's a little colourful community who live there, and you've somehow ended up as part of this community. And really, you just run around and talk to people, and a story unfolds. And it's an interesting one. It's like an anthology of real stories from... I'm not exactly sure where in the Nordic region Welcome to Elk is inspired by, but it's been interesting to play. Like, there is all kinds of dysfunction and difficulty going on in this community, which is slightly at odds with the look of the game. It's like black ink on paper with little splashes of colour here and there. And you run around and your character has this funny, jaunty little run. And you just talk to people. They tell you they need help with something. Maybe there's a couple of mini games like pouring beers in the bar or trying to set up an animal trap for someone who needs to catch animals. These are funny little mini games, just like a WarioWare style. And then you go back to the story. But something that distinguishes Welcome to Elk is that it contains video. And this was a real surprise to me, that it will suddenly flit from that top-down, line-drawn, kooky adventure game, which has very low gameplay and is just mostly about story and context, to literally just sitting and watching someone on the screen tell you the real story that what you've just played is based on. And it's quite interesting. It hasn't stuck with me completely. Like, I play it in very short bursts, and the gameplay is so light that I will sometimes just bounce, like it's not enough to keep me there. But if you're in the right mood and you just want something really low commitment that's almost more like watching a show, Welcome to Elk has been interesting, and I'm going to keep playing that. I might come back to it with a full review. We'll see how I feel about it after I've finished it. I also have been playing a little bit of an interesting village builder called Dorfromantik. This has been in early access for quite a while. It's currently only on PC. It has hexagonal tiles with different scenery on each edge of the tile. So you're looking down on a map, and you might get a tile that has water on one side, rocks on another, forest on another. And you have to match the tiles, and you are rewarded for doing so. So if you manage to match an area of forest or a rocky area or an area of pasture, then you'll get points and you'll get more tiles and your time will continue. The aims are like little mini tasks that just pop up like a to-do list. But unfortunately, I've been running this game on a partitioned Mac drive running Windows, and there is a bit of a glitch in it, unfortunately for me, which means that the houses that appear, which is the real point of the game, you encourage the village to spread, the houses vanish. So this must be because I'm running it not in the way that it's meant to be run. It's meant to be run on a Windows machine. And so it's a sad glitch, but I think it's down to my setup. And I have to say that Dorfromantik looks like an absolutely charming game. It has enough gameplay to be engaging. It has beautiful, ambient, lovely, homely music whilst you're playing. And you can really get into a zone matching tiles and watching the scenery evolve, trying to plan out the area, like where you want there to be a river, where you want there to be a road or a railway. And you're forming the landscape as you're playing. And I can't wait to really play Dorfromantik. With the vanishing houses, it makes it difficult to... You can't really play it that way. I can see little chimney plumes of smoke rather, where the houses are supposed to be, but they're not there. And if you can't see where the houses are, you can't really play the game. So I emailed back to the developer and mentioned that I'm playing it on this non-traditional setup. So I'm really hoping for a Mac version or a console version. And when that happens, I will address Dorfromantik properly on the show. It's definitely a game I'm going to talk about again. There has been a few games like this lately. There was a game called Islanders that came out where you have to do something similar. And there was another game called Townscaper, which is where you just build a little town. But I think that Dorfromantik is perhaps a level above those games. So if you've enjoyed those games, I would keep an eye on this one. The gameplay balance feels better. The fact that you get these little tasks and the way that the UI works and the way that turning your tiles to match them feels. This game feels like the gameplay hook is more fully formed in a way. The other two feel a little bit like toys more than games, and Dorfromantik feels like a real game. So I'm very excited to play that one in the future. I also got a code for Moss Book 2, which is a sequel to Moss, a PlayStation VR game. Haven't yet done that one, but I am going to reconnect my PSVR, and I'll be talking about Moss Book 2 in the future as well. I'm also going to play a little bit of Tetris in VR, Tetris Connected. It's VR compatible, and as you'll hear in the featured review of the episodes, it's a game that I think will uniquely lend itself to VR, so that's very exciting too. But before I get on to talking about Tetris, I will mention that this show is patron supported. I have a really nice community of patrons who support the show for $1 a month or more if they want to. We have a Discord where everyone chats every day. They get occasional extra episodes, and it's a really fun little community around the podcast. So I would like to say a little shout out to my existing patrons, because the community has been popping off a little bit lately. There's so much chat going on. It's really, really fun. People are talking about all kinds of games every day. It's a really, really fun corner of the internet, and I'm very grateful for it. So if you would like to join that community and support the show, you can do so at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. And with that said, let's move on and talk about the featured game of this episode, Tetris Effect Connected. So Tetris Effect Connected is a game that is a new imagining of classic Tetris. It came out in 2018 on PlayStation, then it came out on everything slowly over the years, 2019 on Windows, 2020 on Xbox, and 2021 on Switch. It was originally Tetris Effect, but then a new DLC was released, and so now you can buy Tetris Effect Connected, which introduces a multiplayer element, which is really fun actually. It's also compatible with all of the major home VR devices, and this might actually turn out to be the best way to play it. There's some unique qualities about this game that seem very VR friendly, and I'm looking forward to trying that out. I haven't done it yet because it just takes a little time to hook up the VR. So I've been playing it on my TV screen, and it looks absolutely beautiful on the PlayStation 5. Metacritic gives it a 90 on the PlayStation 4 and a 95 on Switch. It lingers a little bit below that on other formats, but this was a universally acclaimed game. And How Long to Beat, which it seems like a strange thing to talk about, like how do you finish Tetris, but this game has a couple of linear modes that make that relevant. So you can finish this game in 2.5 hours, the story mode, the first iteration of the story mode. But it says that if you want to unlock everything and see everything and finish all of the different modes, it can take up to 30 hours. That being said, Tetris being Tetris, it is a game that has an endless capacity to entertain you. So I'm not sure if this iteration of it will quite manage to have that initial hook that classic Tetris has that just makes you want to play forever, because it is a little more linear and it does have more visual cues of where you're at in the journey. But I think there are probably endless modes tucked away inside of this game. I finished it in 2.5 hours over 3 sessions, and I did a couple of rounds of multiplayer as well and was randomly match made with some collaborators to play the multiplayer. So I can speak on that a little bit too. But I mean, everyone has played Tetris, and it was invented way back in 1984 by Alexei Payetnov, who describes the game proudly as an electronic ambassador of benevolence, which I think is just such a lovely way to look at it. With so many games being based on destroying things, it's true that Tetris is a game, it's just about these falling bricks, it's about creating order. And in that way, it's a completely non-violent game. It's just very, very fun. The only destruction that happens is lines being removed, which doesn't seem to harm anyone. So he's right, it is. It's a lovely non-violent game and a great concept. And as I was reading about this game, I was trying to understand the long and checkered legal history that it's had. Tetris was such an unexpected and huge hit in that Space Invaders way. I think very few games are, especially in the modern era, these games that hinge entirely on a concept. I mean, I guess something like Threes might be a more modern Tetris. It's all about mechanics. It's all about the ongoing puzzle. And it's different every single time you play it. And Threes did actually get a lot of copycats in the same way that Tetris has. So maybe that's the current day carrier of the torch for this electronic ambassador of benevolence title is something like Threes. But I had no idea that Tetris originally belonged, at least in part, to the Soviet state. But because it was such a big hit and people wanted to play it all over the world, it's passed through the hands along the way of many companies, a couple of which are Atari, Nintendo, and Electronic Arts. It's now owned by the Tetris Company, which is a shell company, I guess, that holds the rights to Tetris. And they are highly litigious. They've been going around having copycats taken down, of which there are many. And they seem to be concerned with standardizing the experience of Tetris with a color scheme for the pieces, with some simple rules that mean it's an official version of Tetris that people have to adhere to. And that was pretty interesting to me. It's interesting that there is a company that, as well as being a business holding that is concerned with making money out of Tetris, is also interested in the integrity of the game of Tetris. So they are actively working to make sure that people always get that classic Tetris experience. Another thing that I discovered, I'm just going to rattle through a couple of interesting facts before I get onto this game, is that clearing 4 lines at once, that power moment in a game of Tetris where you've built up all the blocks, you've managed to leave that narrow channel, the straight piece that you need finally comes, and you slam it down there and you get all of the bonus points. That's actually called a Tetris. I didn't know that. I thought Tetris was just the name of the game, but it is actually getting a Tetris like getting a bingo. I had no idea. And everyone's played Tetris, everyone knows what it is, but Tetris Effect is a really interesting and loving recreation of the game that kind of celebrates what this game is and modernizes it to some degree and gives it a lot more visual flourish, but in a way that I really like, actually. I think sometimes if you mess with perfection, you're only going to make it worse. And it would be so easy for this game to do that, to add a lot of bells and whistles that aren't required and to dilute the core experience. But what this game does is actually pull out some of the aspects of that experience and amplify them in a really interesting way. So it adheres to that classic Tetris gameplay, but with a few tweaks, such as how and when the speed of the falling pieces changes, the length of levels, and a complete audio-visual makeover. It gives Tetris a completely different feel. The Tetris Effect, the name of the game, is actually named after the phenomenon that people have of when they've played Tetris for a long time, they see the pieces falling when they have their eyes closed. They see it when they're lying in bed trying to sleep. There's something about this falling, endless rain of irregularly shaped pieces and slotting them all together to create order that just has an interesting effect on people. I mean, I've experienced the Tetris Effect. I didn't know it was called that until I played this game, but I remember as a kid absolutely loving playing Tetris on my original brick Game Boy. It was the game that I played the most on that thing, alongside a couple of little Zeldas and Mario games. Tetris was the real classic, and funnily enough, it's the only game that my parents play, really. My dad plays Tetris on a Game Boy every day. He plays it on a Game Boy DS, and he hasn't been sick of it over decades. So it speaks to, you know, the immortal appeal of Tetris, really. So what this game does that is different is that it really changes the basics of how the game looks, sounds, feels, and plays in a really interesting way. It still has that classic well shape that you always see. The tetronomos are exactly the same. So the standards that the Tetris company has set for a game to be considered Tetris are here. But the visuals are so different outside of that basic structure. For example, in one early memorable level in this journey that you can take, this journey mode that forms the basic trajectory of this game, you'll see glittering lights behind the well. So as you're playing Tetris, there are glimmering lights in the background that seem to pulse in time with the music. And the game's music is like a euphoric electronica, quite propulsive, like a club soundtrack. It's like, you know how club house music has the repetition is something that people love. You know, the effect of listening to techno and house music is similarly mesmerizing. There's something about the repetition of it and the rise and fall and the hold and release of tension that makes that music what it is. And this game employs that music, so you're playing along with music, and as you're playing, there is a light show behind your game of Tetris, where the lights pulse in time with the music, where the music responds and changes based on what you're doing on the screen. So if you get a line, there'll be a little change in the music that you can hear. If you get a Tetris, then the music might pick up and get new elements. And it all adds to this feeling of acceleration and propulsion and progress So you really feel that as you're playing your game of Tetris and as you're clearing lines and as you're trying to navigate what the game is, the music adds to that sense of hypnosis that makes the game so good, and adds to the sense of euphoria, a strange sense of euphoria. So as you're clearing your lines, it just picks up and picks up until the music will peak, and then suddenly, rather than gradually, the lines will be falling incredibly fast. And you'll really just have to try and survive these sections where the music is climaxing, and you have to get through that section, just stay alive, with the pieces falling at top speed with this music pounding. And then when you've cleared a certain amount of lines, you've passed that tidal wave, the pieces go back to their normal speed, and then you have like a slow come down from that peak that this game has managed to make. And it's really special and really cool. And you know, for every level of the game where I was going through this experience and watching the lights change and form shapes and become swimming dolphins that are swimming into the screen as you clear the Tetris lines, it's really spectacular, really, really fun, really enjoyable. I smiled so much playing this game. It's just wonderful. And so, as you move through the journey of playing Tetris Effect Connected, each level has a different theme. The music changes from region to region. You will sometimes be on an ocean level where you'll be gliding across glimmering water with the sun moving through the sky, and that will be pulsing in time with the music, which is themed around that free oceanic sort of feeling. There are times when you are in a desert and little points of light slowly cohere into dots, and then the dots cohere further into camel riders, and you'll realize there is a trail of people crossing the desert. There's another one that's a mountain. You start at the base of the mountain, and as you progress, you move up the mountain towards the peak, and then obviously as you get to the peak of the mountain, the pieces start to come down really fast, and then you just get a beautiful sunset as the come down occurs. And it's also well done. It feels like some kind of connection between the experience of playing this game and like being in a club, honestly. Like the lights and the way that they are, the way that they pulse with the music, the way that they move around, it's a little bit like it could be a backdrop for a DJ. It could be a backdrop for like an electronic act at a music festival. It has that feel to it. And it's really interesting to connect those two things together, like the sensation, the feeling, and the experience of playing a quite humble game like Tetris that has that repetition, and to connect that to the more euphoric, active, spectacular connection to a feeling of repetition that you'll get from electronic music is such a smart move, and it really has a nice effect, you know. I think it's a very clever thing that they have done here, and I think that it's very well executed. And as a lover of Tetris and as a lover of electronic music, and you know, we've all been stuck in the house throughout this entire pandemic and not really been out there in the world, you know, not really been at music festivals or packed rooms. At least I haven't. I'm sure some people have. I've just been living very quietly and used to be out all the time at gigs and concerts and festivals, you know, over the years. There was always at least one or two music festivals and gigs every month. And it was just lovely to get a little taste of that experience by immersing myself in this game, turning down the lights, turning up the volume, feeling the bass of the music and seeing the flashing lights and experiencing those highs and lows that the game offers and that the experience offers. It was really welcome and unexpected. And of course the multiplayer is the other aspect of the game that is new. I played a couple of rounds of this. There is a matchmaking situation going on, so if you say that you're up for a game of multiplayer, Tetris Effect Connected, you just enter a lobby, you choose the mode that you want to play. I played co-op against an AI, which is 3-player Tetris. So 3 wells will appear on the screen, and the AI will be playing just on the right. So you're one of the players, you can see the usernames of the other players, and you all play separately until a set amount of lines have been cleared, racing against the AI to try and keep it going. And then all of a sudden, the music will pick up and trigger, and you'll find that all 3 wells between yourself and the other players meld together into one giant, long game of Tetris with pieces falling down. You can place pieces in other players' spaces, and suddenly you're all racing against the AI together to try and keep this going across a really wide area of Tetris that's completely new. And it was just really, really fun to see what they were doing to try and fix their problems and to see them trying to fix yours. It was a really nice moment of connection that was also very welcome. So I had a great time with Tetris Effect Connected so far. I think I will be playing more of it. It's lovely on a big 4K screen. It just looks so beautiful. And I think I'm going to continue working my way through those modes. It's just nice to switch your mind off and play something like Tetris. What was that quote again? An electronic ambassador of benevolence. I just love that. I'm going to try and remember that one. And I've even put it onto my Switch wish list because I think even if you're not playing with other people and you just feel like trying out one of the different modes on your own, I think Tetris Effect Connected could be the perfect game to be playing if you're traveling with a Switch, if you're on a train and your attention is a little too scattered for something with a story and with dialogue and reading, or something more involved. It could be a really nice game to just switch off to, so I think it's perfect for the Switch. It's more expensive there. I think it's only £35 on all platforms, but I've seen it come down to, I think, 15 or so. So as I already own the game, I will try and get the Switch version when the price is right. I don't really have downsides for this one. You know, Tetris is a perfect game, and this is a close to perfect reimagining of it. The only things that really caught my eye are that it can be a little bit distracting if things are getting tough and you're seeing this pulsing light all around you as you're trying to keep your run alive. Also, the little blocks that make up the tetronimos evolve from level to level. So sometimes they are irregular shapes, sometimes they are animated. So if you see like a straight one coming down, you can see the pieces, the squares, turning on the screen. And if you're a purist, that can throw off your eye a little bit on your placement of the pieces. So it's perhaps not the most pure version of Tetris, if you know what I mean. It's a more playful version with a different aim in mind. So those things caught my eye a little, but they really didn't detract from it. If anything, I would say that the overall addition of experience that this game gives you is worth the trade-off. And you can always go back and play classic Tetris if you want to. I think maybe even in this game. So a big recommendation from me, if you're a fan of original Tetris, if you're looking for something to switch off your mind, and if you would like to see a new iteration of Tetris that is really successful, they did a really good job here. It's a loving tribute to Tetris. I have to leave that in, that's too funny. It's a loving tribute to Texas. It's a loving tribute to Tetris. That's Tetris Effect Connected. So that was Tetris Effect Connected. I hope you enjoyed that review as much as I enjoyed playing the game and talking about it. Thanks very much for listening. As always, I appreciate everyone that does listen. I also appreciate people that come and chat to me, tell me what they thought of the game that I'm playing. If you've played Tetris Effect Connected or if you've enjoyed this podcast, please come and say hello. I'm over on social media at Gaming in the Wild, especially on Twitter. It's the main place that I'm at, so you can find me there. Also Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch sometimes, although I say this every week. I always mean to stream. I never get around to it. I'd also like to thank all of my patrons, and if you have enjoyed this show, you're welcome to become a patron. You can find the information for that at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. I will leave a link in the show notes if that interests you. I'll be back next week with a new episode. Not quite sure what it will be about yet. I'm still just neck deep in Elden Ring. I have had some thoughts that I might cover Life is Strange True Colors. I played it over Christmas and haven't talked about it yet. My memories of it are not like from yesterday, they're from a few months ago now, but I do have notes that I made during my playthrough. And seeing as it's coming to Game Pass, I might talk about that game on the show. I know that there are some listeners who are curious about that game and have had their eye on it, so maybe it's an opportune time to discuss that one. Guardians of the Galaxy is another game that I've played and just glanced on briefly in the show, so maybe one of those, maybe something else. I've got a couple of guests that I'm hoping to have on soon, so it could be a guest episode. But either way, I'll be back with a new episode next week. Thanks very much for listening. Take care of yourselves and each other, and bye-bye for now.